Episode 328, Adapted to Current Conditions. This is the Change Underground. I'm your host, John Moore. Decarbonise the air, recarbonise the soil. I heard a great podcast clip today and I recommend you have a listen, link in the show notes. It was an interview with a Ukrainian orchardist. Asked about how he was going, his response was a laconic, "We have adapted to current conditions." When probed a little further, these current conditions were as followed. They work in the orchard until they hear an air raid warning, when they pile into the bunkers. Once the raid is over, a local military detachment inspects the orchard for unexploded ordnance. If none, back to work. If not clear, a UXO team comes in, detonates the material in a safe manner, and work resumes. Now, this sounds like an unpleasant way to farm, but wow. Turns out these air raids can occur every couple of weeks, or several times a day. I'm not sure about you, listener, but my life is pretty good by comparison. People have a way of dealing with whatever is thrown at them in ways that never cease to amaze me. And as the interviewee said on the clip, they have to keep working the orchard even though they didn't harvest any fruit this year and let it be known that anyone could help themselves. They have to stay in business as they are the only employer in the district. I think it will be that human spirit that gets us through the next couple of decades as we work through a decarbonising world. Things are going to get worse, even with a 1.5 degree rise in global temperatures, and that's unlikely to be met. People are going to have their lives upended as farming practices change, either by choice or mandate over the coming years. I heard another interview this week, and I just can't find the podcast I was listening to, but if I do, I'll update the show notes. In this particular interview, the guest was talking about how the word Anthropocene was just another way for people to think that the climate crisis was their own personal responsibility, when the real culprits were governments and corporations. Now, this wasn't a Marxist interpretation, thankfully. I lived through most of the Cold War and listened to, because it was unlike anything else I could listen to, the Chinese Cultural Revolution on a late relative's huge old valve-driven shortwave radio. The gist of that experience reminds me of much of the rhetoric coming from the other end of the political spectrum nowadays. Cycles, I guess. Anyway, this fellow was suggesting that governments receiving donations from corporations to ensure legislative frameworks for those corporations to continue doing what they have been doing means no amount of recycling, purchases of organic produce, or refusal to use single-use plastic will make a jot of difference to the climate crisis. His argument was that we need to redirect corporate aims from shareholder value to, well, to paraphrase, decarbonising the air and recarbonising the soil. Now, this isn't going to be easy, even in societies where citizens can express their democratic will. But he argued it could be done. The 8-hour day was going to ruin business, ending child labour likewise, and yet here we are. Make no mistake, though, those who are threatened will retaliate. We had a super profits tax introduced here in Australia during the mining boom of the late noughties, and the billionaire miners unleashed hell on the governing party to such an extent they buckled, were eventually replaced by a rabid Conservative government, a member of whom brought a lump of coal into the parliament to show how, in inverted commas, safe it was. And it got worse. That clown ended up as our Prime Minister, just as the most severe consequences so far of burning coal hit the country during the Black Summer bushfires. And you'll not be surprised to learn that that particular PM decided it was time to take a holiday with his family in Hawaii during the fires. He then threw money at his corporate mates and donors during the COVID thing, whilst leaving universities and artists to sack staff and artists to starve, basically. When we finally voted the bum out, he decided he'd give his first speech after losing in a landslide to Margaret Court's Prosperity Gospel Church, where he stated, and I couldn't make this up, he stated, "I've never believed in government." Apparently we end up with the politicians we deserve, but I mean, really? So you see the difficulty we face when attempting to drive change through a parliament. The replacement government, a left-of-centre Labor Party government, is beholden to coal mining as well, and all mining unions for that matter, for both funding and historical reasons. Things have improved, as in this government actually recognises there is a climate crisis, but things move slowly, too slowly. How any change is possible under authoritarian regimes is almost beyond me. As ever, my go-to move is to grow more of our own food and encourage everyone else to do so too. As weather events are likely to spiral into greater extremes than we've experienced in the last 100 years or so, and to do this with increasing frequency, we need to build safety nets into our lives, our communities, our districts and our countries. And as we discussed back in episode 310, Avian Flu and Food Security, link in the show notes, there appears to be a rise in the number of avian flu cases around Europe. Now, this might just be better reporting, but it could also mean a rise in avian flu cases. Worryingly, sea lions, that is a mammal species, have also tested positive. The good news is they appear to have become infected by eating sick birds rather than transmission from mammal to mammal. But let's remember it's just a matter of a mutation and sufficient exposure to a susceptible population to have us heading into another pandemic. And flu was the one that most governments had done their modelling on prior to COVID. Look, have a safety net, people, as much as you possibly can. 2019 to the present have provided ample examples of black swan events, to the point where a month where nothing seems to happen has me a little on edge. Stay resilient, open-minded, and ride the waves or the turbulence or the corners, whichever speaks to you the most. The Change Underground Academy No-Dig Gardening course is still available, link in the show notes. Please tell your friends. Decarbonise the air, recarbonise the soil. Thanks for listening. I'll be back next week. This has been a JM Podcasting Services production, link in the show notes.